No mistake there.
Okay.
Welcome, everyone. Happy Father's Day, and thank you for joining the East Mediterranean Business Culture Alliance's 4th Hellenic Energy Independence Forum, the Meta-vasis Phase panel discussion. My name is Lou Katsos, EMBCA's president, and this discussion will be moderated by Konstantine Drougos of the OASIS Carbon Management Group and an EMBCA director. Our distinguished panelists for this discussion includes George Adalis, Geopolitical Analyst and Energy Expert, Kristina Katsos, Country Manager of Cyprus for Age Energy, Liana Gouta, Energy Policy and International Affairs Director, HELLENiQ ENERGY Group, and Harilaos Petrakakos, Principal of P&P Marine Consultants and a nuclear power expert. This 4th Hellenic Energy Independence Forum panel discussion will include, among other things, the current energy landscape in the Hellenic Republic and Cyprus, and taking into account the geoeconomics and geopolitics of the East Mediterranean, which includes the impact of Russia's invasion of the Ukraine and the issues surrounding it. Energy dependence has been identified as one of a variety of factors, including energy sources diversification, energy suppliers diversification, energy sources fungibility, energy transport, market liquidity, energy resources, political stability, energy intensity, etc., and negatively contributing to energy security. As such, a higher level of energy dependence is risk-prone because of the possible interference of commodity price fluctuations, trade wars, international armed conflicts, terrorist attacks, etc. Energy independence, in a way, is an idealized status that at present can only be approximated by exploitation of a country's natural resources, including renewable and non-renewable sources. It is my pleasure to introduce today for the panel discussion, our moderator, Konstantine Drougos. Konstantine has many years' experience in developing highly innovative energy projects in the US and worldwide, and is currently the managing director of Argo Marketing International Consultants that advises a variety of organizations. He is also the CEO of the OASIS Carbon Management Group based in the US and Greece, and works with power companies and governments in devising low carbon footprint, sustainable green solutions, as well as being an EMBCA director. The opportunities to revitalize the Hellenic as well as the Cypriot energy industry and overcome the current challenges in the coming years is what our distinguished panel will explore in this 4th in a series of Hellenic Energy. And it's due to the overwhelming response from you, our audience, to continue the dialogue from our previous energy events. We hope that this continuing conversation and others going forward contributes to a wave of innovation in this regard. Welcome, Konstantine, and thank you for being today's moderator.
Welcome again. Thank you. Happy Father's Day. This is, I got a big card from my daughter, and I was like, oh, yes, they remember us as well. But that's beside the point. This is the 4th of the series in Hellenic Energy Independence. When Lou, you and I have started this conversation, it was innovative. It was like it was actually energy independence. It was a different concept. That was before the Ukraine war and some other things that have happened since the last 4 years alone. That is. So now we're talking about the world in Greek. I think is better than transition with meta-vasis. So we're changing the basis of energy, and energy being one of the primary goods, agatha, as we say in Greek. And it's actually what makes the economy moves. In this meta-vasis transition stage, we have 4 distinguished experts here with us, and thank you all for being with us today. in a beautiful Sunday evening here in Greece and a beautiful Sunday afternoon over in the US. And we try to actually address some of the meta-vasis issues and what it actually means, because we hear a lot of this conversation about net zero. We hear about pollution. We actually have never put it together, and I think with Harilaos has started earlier the conversation in our before about climate change versus pollution. We do have an extreme problem of pollution, that there are certain measures that can be taken now and should be taken now. It's immediate. Climate change is a much, much longer process, and it has to be addressed both on terms of sustainability, geopolitics, and many other factors that we're going to be discussing later on. Also, this transition, the meta-vasis, is also mostly in economics, in finance, and its influence on the power mix are very important, and it changes the balance of global politics and the way we know things today. So how will that works in the future? And we'll start with Kristina. Welcome, Kristina. Thank you for being with us. Kristina is being right now, as Lou has mentioned, the Managing Director of Age Energy, which is in the renewable sector, in the solar energy. And we've heard a lot about renewables, and it's important to actually address, and also Kristina is in Dubai right now. I mean, she's in Cyprus right now, but she lives in Dubai, and she is a teacher, a professor there at the university. And she also has, besides academia, she has experience and collaborated with governmental bodies, non-profit organizations, and industry leaders to create real-world solutions, which I think that's what we need today. And what I enjoy about these conversations, and I'm part of them, is because we're talking about the real world and not the theoretical realm that sometimes you hear in different. And so let's talk about solar and its effect. And we had spoken when we spoke about the connectivity of Southern Europe with Northern Europe, because Southern Europe is definitely an advantage when it comes to renewables, especially solar. Welcome, Kristina.
Thank you, Konstantine. It's very nice to be here today. Thank you for inviting me to this wonderful panel discussion today. I want to take a very short second and wish Happy Father's Day to my father-in-law, Luke Katsos, and which today I honestly it's flown by me because I had a very busy day. So my apologies that it's come to the end of the day for me to wish him Happy Father's Day. And but it's good because it's such a wonderful inclusive space with you all. Today I'm going to be speaking a little bit about Cyprus's transition towards energy independence, because I believe that Cyprus is being an island nation, right? An EU nation, but being an island nation is in a disadvantaged position as comparison to many European nations. And however, while disadvantaged, it also has many advantages when it comes to that transition that we were talking about. So when we talk about energy independence, we have to really link it. And obviously, from Lou's introduction, we talked about how energy security is very important, and those are it's something that I want to kind of gravitate on today. How energy security is all about availability, affordability, as well as the environmental impact that this transition will look like. So right now, Cyprus is, when you look at it from the outside, Cyprus is pretty energy secure, right? We have an electricity consumption of about 30 terawatts per hour, and our production meets that demand by about 106 percentage points, which means that we have access to electricity to all the people living in the country, which is wonderful and amazing. However, as we know from the recent war and the crisis in general, economic crisis in the world, that security is becoming more and more coming more and more at risk, because the affordability aspect of the electricity production is in fluctuation. However, and this is highlighted by the fact that Cypriot consumers pay the highest electricity prices in all of Europe right now, mostly because we rely on thermal electricity production, and that has fluctuated quite a bit with the war in Russia and with all the games that are played in the world with the buying and selling of non-renewable sources of energy. So for the past about 15 years or so, guided by EU regulations, Cyprus has really been driving towards shifting to renewable sources of energy, and solar is the main renewable source because of our unique geographical characteristic in Cyprus, right? We have, just like in Greece, we have the sun almost 99% of the year, and therefore that's been the target of the country. However, we are not meeting our targets fast enough. Right, Cyprus has renewable energy targets right now of about 23% by 2030, and we've met about 16% so far. We're ahead of many other European nations, but we're still falling short. And by falling short, Cyprus, and I want you to note this amount of money right now, Cyprus consumers have paid 570 million euros within the last 5 years in energy fines that are issued by the EU because of our failure to switch to renewable sources of energy fast enough. That, in my mind, is not a fast enough transition, but also it really makes us very insecure in this already a very volatile market. So what's the solution, right? Obviously, as a representative of a solar company here and a firm believer in the solar electricity production, I'm going to talk about not just the potential of the country, but the fact that we really need it, and it is a sustainable source of electricity production. So it is in Cyprus right now, we have about 390 megawatts of solar production right now, and we could double and triple that quite easily to be able to meet the needs of the country. Because of solar energy generation costs dropping over the years, and that is something that is quite promising for Cyprus. It is, however, problematic in many ways because we have a lot of producers and a lot of potential producers, but there has to be a conversation by all stakeholders that are in the market, both government and non-governmental stakeholders, in order to make that transition easier and better. The government right now is really encouraging this transition. However, the electricity market is not open yet, is not quite as open. Cyprus is one of the most monopolistic markets in Europe that prevents the country from moving in a more competitive model, which keeps the prices of electricity pretty high. That's very good for solar producers, but it's not very good for the consumers. And as someone who really truly believes in solar generation in a more sustainable manner, it has to be beneficial for both producers and consumers. So that's something that it's a conversation that we're constantly having with the government and all other involved stakeholders. And that's something that we're going to continue to do. And in order to make solar producing electricity generation in Cyprus sustainable, that's something that we need to deepen the conversation in. However, electricity production that comes from solar is not the only thing that we should be focusing on. Something that my company focuses on and that many companies around Europe are also focusing on is energy storage technologies. Energy storage is where it's at. We need to avoid the loss of electricity that's being produced right now by investing in advanced storage technologies, whatever those might be, whatever the potential might be, and I will talk a little bit more about that in a second. But in Cyprus, in particularly, we have about energy losses on average per year between 230 to 250 million kilowatts per hour in electricity losses, which is a very large amount of just lost potential out there that if we could harness and really make it accessible to the consumers, because obviously solar is dependent on the sun. And when we have, and with climate change, all of these things are going to be transitioning in unpredictable patterns. And therefore, energy storage technologies are key to our sustainable move towards energy security and energy independence in not just the Southern Mediterranean, but all of Europe if we're focusing on Europe for right now. Right, so we need to harness that electricity and feed it back into the system. That will balance the prices back up, and therefore affordability, which is the biggest issue with energy security right now in the southern Mediterranean, will be able to be addressed properly. I'm kind of speeding up on my points here only because I was told I only have 10 minutes, and then if anyone has any questions, I will be happy to answer them in a little bit. The last thing I want to talk about is the fact that Cyprus being an island and Cyprus being in the southern Mediterranean, and the focus for the last 50 years or so in Europe has been in the focus in Northern Europe and how there should be energy secure. We need to think about the fact that interconnectivity and proper energy trading between all of Europe, but harnessing the potential that Southern Europe has and empowering Southern Europe to really meet that potential and helping Northern Europe is something that we should be seriously talking about. So cross-border interconnection is very important, and Cyprus is already moving in that direction. There is already a plan in what we call the Eurasia Interconnector to connect Cyprus with Greece, and then from Greece to the greater Europe, in order to connect us and not only sell electricity, but also be able to buy electricity at proper prices, and therefore enhancing that energy security for us. So that mutual sharing of resources can really enhance energy security, optimizing energy utilization and reducing the need for fossil fuel imports. So, okay, and last but not least, I have my last point. I thought I would cut it over there, but I have one more point. The fact that policy and regulatory frameworks in Europe should be all-inclusive. And right now, the frameworks are really generating from Northern Europe and kind of trickle down to Southern Europe. And those policy frameworks need to be more supportive. We need to have more funds that are already there are funds, but there should be more funds that come from the EU down to the Southern Mediterranean to be able to support these frameworks that we talked about, right? Feeding tariffs, tax incentives, a more streamlined permitting process in order to create this more secure framework will encourage the growth of renewable energy projects and therefore make them more sustainable in the long term. So I will leave it there, and I'll be happy to talk about more about the issues that I just brought up. But I bring it back to you, Konstantine.
Thank you, Kristina. It was very informative, and it's a part of when you spoke about the tariffs and the system and how it's been calculated. When I was talking, and welcome, George. Thank you for being with us. He has an affinity to mathematics, and he studied. We had this conversation, and I was laughing when he explained that to me, but I don't think it's funny. How you calculate the price of electricity in Greece. You need to have at least a PhD from Harvard to get it right. And correct me if I'm wrong, George. And things should be simpler, or maybe I'm simplistic. I'm not sure which one. It's but thank you for being with us, George. And here we have, as we spoke earlier, as they say, the Meta-vasis. Is it an energy transition, or is it an energy mix transition? Because really, we had for many, many years in Greece, lignite. We had one of the cheapest electricity rates in Europe. And along with other things that have happened, and with all the bad things that come with it. Now, Cyprus is the most expensive, but I think we're up there. I don't know if we're second or third, but we're definitely up there when it comes to pricing. And we do have some hydros, and we do have, again, very good projects on LNG and importing LNG and creating a steady base of, secure base of base load. But is that enough? Welcome, Yorgos. And the world has been, I think, is going around faster nowadays. I mean, I think it's you turn on the news and something new is happening every day, and you follow the news and the energy world daily. So tell us some of your thoughts.
for the invitation. It's been an honor to me work with all the other people here. So about your question, I think it's more about energy transition. My point of view is that it's a total transition to everything. So because energy is the top of the iceberg, is a thing that attracts journalists, maybe politicians, maybe corporate interests. So it's more, it's quite more interesting. And the last 3 years is quite more interesting for the people, for the consumers, because of the large bills that they pay, not only to the bills of the electricity, their homes, their business, but even the skyrocket prices on the pump. I'm talking about unleaded and diesel. So all this has to change, I think, the discussion, because I think we have. It's better for us to say about strategies. And you know something? Yesterday, I was. I remember an old joke with a frog. I think you know it. There was a great scientist that makes experiments with frogs, and he take a frog in a chair, cut the first leg, and say the frog jump, and the frog jumps. Say okay, the frog can listen. He cut the second leg, cut the third leg, jump, barely make a jump, the frog with only one leg. And always the scientist said, you see, the frog can hear. So when he finally cuts the last leg of the frog, he said, I order you to jump. I'm ordering you, frog, jump. But the frog couldn't. So finally, the scientists make a statement, a conclusion, which is say, you see, when we cut all the 4 legs of the frog cannot listen. That's what are we doing right now. We think that the people is like the frog, and because we told the people jump, the people will jump, but they cannot, even if they want to. So I'm taking this from our time to say this as a parenthesis, because I think that our first problem is the total absence of the strategy, of a main strategy, of a total European strategy, if we're talking about energy. But
and US strategy too, so we shouldn't let ourselves out of the box.
Not in that level, but yes, I can agree with you. I can agree with you. But anyway, there is something else. We are energy. We are not only talking about energy or in the name friends, we are energy. And if it is not quite well to say things like this, we are energy, it's a little kind of selfish. Okay, I agree with that too. But the human body is energy. The human body is whatever we eat. We eat, all the foods we eat is made by 5 kinds of the 8 main kinds of fertilizers are made by natural gas or oil. The 5 biggest kinds of fertilizers. So when we eat something, it's produced by natural gas or petroleum. The human body is that's what I'm telling you, that we are hydrocarbons as a body, because we eat all this stuff. Anyway, the strategy that I would be very happy if sometime it will be changed. It is concerning Greece, but mostly the manufacturers of the EU, countries like Germany, like Italia, like Italy, like Poland, but they think that everything is possible. No, you can make mistakes to other factors, but you cannot make mistakes at energy sector. And the thing that I want to see and make me very glad is when finally we will talk about my dream. And my dream is what I call a wise energy mix. That's the point. Nobody, I think.
And I think Turkey, our friend in the East, I don't know if it's wise, but they definitely have put a great effort in their energy mix, much more versatile, including renewables and nuclear and many other things. Sorry to interrupt you, but it was interesting that I've been following their development there, and it's it's post-European almost.
That's another sad story, because I think Erdogan's policy is based on that exactly, on a wise national energy mix. And I was planning to talk about this for 2 minutes, because look, when we talk about the seven kind of energy production, first of all, we have to see the capacity factor, because all the energy do not have the same capacity factor. For example, the largest capacity factor is concerning nuclear plants. Nuclear plants that producing have over 92% capacity factor. With the way that we estimate the capacity factor of all the rest, I will talk about. The second is the geothermal, a forgotten industry here in Greece. With such volcanoes, such warm hotspots. Anyway, it's 75%. The third place is natural gas, with a capacity factor of 56.6%. And after that is that the hydroelectric power, with a capacity factor of 41.5%. After all this is lignites, 40%. And at the bottom of the list is the wind power with 35.4%, and the last is the solar power with 24.9%. So I know from my work, because I have worked for every kind of factors like this, businesses like this abroad. So yes, you can say that if you want to have 1 gigawatt nuclear plant, you can take 92%. We all know it's not exactly like this. We compare, just compare. But if you want to have the same power with solar and get 1 gigawatt, you have to get 4 solar installations. Each one is 1 gigawatt to reach the nuclear power. So I think that we have to see this from another point of view with a strategy, because we don't have time. Yes, we all want 2050 zero carbon, but can we? Can we? And with
Do
what?
we need to? Sorry, George, do we need to?
Do we need to? Yeah, okay. I don't know. But you're right, of course. But anyway, that is the biggest problem, is that we say we don't want oil. Okay. So what can we do today that over 100 million barrels is the level of the that we want to consume. We consume
the
every
daily
day
consumption
100,
of oil is about 100 million.
100 million barrels of oil. So when it was April with the lockdown and everything was shut down, the industries, the transportation, the airplanes were grounded, everything. The people was in the houses, no cars outside. So we consume about 85 million barrels per day. That is a very beautiful Greek word, anelasticota. That's the level. We cannot consume lower. So what else is that we don't want? Yeah, okay. This is natural gas. And what else? It's lignite. Okay, that's fossil fuels. We agree. But how can we explain now, after all this and all these investments, the United States of America still have 62% of its capacity from oil fuels? Where are those investments in renewable going? Excuse me. Anyway, because you asked me about Erdogan, yes, of course, he's chasing a wise mix so as to dominate the region. And how he thought he made that plan? Look, he made his last lignite plant before 2 years in Konstantinopla. It's a very nice plan. This time, the official plans of Greece were to close all the carbon plants, the lignites and all that. Apart from that, he finished his first of the 3 nuclear plants made by Rosatom. No sanctions. There are no sanctions there. As I can tell you, there are no sanctions in LNG, Russian LNG. Everybody buys Russian LNG. Anyway, he's trying to operate it in this year, but I say it can manage to operate in 2024. The good thing for him is that he already sold 70% of the capacity of the electricity that that plant can produce. Have it pre-sale till now. It's not ready. In Akuyu, it's not ready. It's not ready. But he did. Apart from that, he invested in LNG.
And I'm sure it's at a
factories.
very good price compared to the rest of the sources. That's why he pre-sold it at an advantage price, and the people who actually got the first contracts got, the best.
Why don't we hold up this discussion for the general discussion? Let's go through the
Yes, yes.
presentations if we can. It'll be a lot easier to have these discussions later.
Yes.
I'm finishing. So the last thing is that he's finishing his LNG investments, and apart from the pipelines that he buys from Russia, he have a long-term agreement with Louisiana for 20 years now, and he buys United States of America LNG. And I don't remember, I started one year to count the hydroelectric power plants that he made with his big readers, and I stopped. I stopped counting at 25. And you know, we have one that our public, they made, that is closed the last 10 years, like Hellenic River.
So
And apart from that, he does renewal. Yes, he invests in renewal. Why I'm saying all this? Because after 5 years, there will be a country, Turkey, next to us, that he produces nuclear, geothermal, lignite, hydroelectric power, and of course, renewable. And he will export that to all bankers among us who compare with this. The only thing that were good is LNG. We have to make some very good movements. I don't think we have made a lot of things to the other factors of the energy. And that will be the problem. Because all this decade until 2029, 2030, I am sure that will be a decade of energy crisis. That's my opinion. So the European Union, the United States of America, Greece, will have to change their strategy and be more realistic to what the people need and how much cost can the people pay. That would be the strategy, I think.
I will only add one thing, that the politics of a dictator is a lot different than the politics of the West, including the United States and also the EU. That's the only thing I will say. We'll get into that. We'll get into that later. We'll get into that later. We'll get into that later.
Let's talk later about this. Let's talk later about this.
Thank you, Yorgos. And since you mentioned everything else, and Turkey also has a very, and we're going to Liana next, Turkey has a very active role in oil and gas exploration. I think a lot of the big discussions we have nowadays is about the Aegean and what's going to happen next over there. But they already started, they've been successful in the Black Sea. And Botas and Tupras around, and other Turkish companies, they're actively sourcing energy, oil and gas around the world, investing billions. They're going to Africa. They've went to Latin America. They just signed a big deal, a few $1 billion there. So energy security for them is important, and they put their money where the mouth is. It's not just theoretical. But since we're started, we're talking about oil and gas. Liana, thank you. Welcome. And Liana is the international. Oops, I missed my notes here. But
the Energy Policy and International Affairs Director at Hellenic Energy.
Hellenic IQ, and we had this discussion. It was previously LP, Hellenic Petroleum, and they have an extensive, portfolio of renewables, which is a new area that they've been into in Greece so far. I think it's one of the most, maybe the most profitable company in Greece. A publicly listed company as well. And they are also very active in the E&P, exploration and production sectors in Greece. And they're also discussing, about fuels, other fuels that can be produced, hopefully in Greece, and can be used in the mix. Hellenic is a benchmark for Greece, and when it comes to energy. And I don't know if many people know, most people, when they think of Greece, they may think of olive oil, oregano, and wine. But when it comes to exports, it's oil, diesel, and gasoline that are the main exports of Greece. And this is a great example of success of Meta-vasis, we call it, bringing a product and making it into another high-value product and sell it around the world. And so tell us a little bit about HELLENiQ, its strategy, because you are one of the basics, structures that's supporting the Meta-vasis here in Greece. Before, now, and in the future.
Yes. Thank you very much, Konstantinos, for the kind introduction, and thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to participate in this interesting discussion with the distinguished panelists. So we are here to discuss energy dependence, energy security, and hopefully energy autonomy in the future, a future that has to become carbon neutral within the next 30 years. As Konstantinos said, I represent the fuels industry in this panel, and therefore I will focus on the integral role that the sector will have to achieve in the future, and the integral role of the sector in achieving both climate neutrality and energy autonomy. But first of all, let me give you some introductory info on the characteristics of the refining sector and its contribution to Europe and to Greece, to our economy and to our societies. Next slide, please. Refineries constitute a vital infrastructure for Europe. They produce and supply fuels for road transport, for aviation, shipping, and heating. And it produces and supplies energy products for construction, agriculture, and most important, for the petrochemical industry. European refineries produce domestically, but they rely on imported feedstock. They have been at the cutting edge of technological innovation, but they have to survive international competition with respect to refineries in non-European areas with less ambitious legislation. And last but not least, they are strong contributors to the EU economy, as we can see on the slide, regarding the GDP, the state tax income, regarding high-skilled and well-paying jobs, just to name a few. In Greece, refining has had a history of 65 years, since 1958, and a very strong footprint on the economy and society as well. Next slide, please. So at Hellenic Energy Group, we operate 3 out of the 4 Greek refineries today. We cover around 65% of the Greek market needs, and we supply fuels to 6 countries through our retail network. We are a major exporter, as Konstantinos said, in the country, with around 50 to 60% of our products being exported in the East Med market, highly competitive in the national market. And we have been greatly contributing to the national trade balance, since exports of oil products in Greece represent 26% of all Greek exports, as Konstantin mentioned, as I said. And at Hellenic Energy Group, besides refining, our activities expand to petrochemicals, exploration activities, natural gas, power generation, and renewables. And with our activities, next slide, please. We contribute to the economy of Greece with an equivalent of around 1% to the country's GDP and a total of 3.4% of the annual country's tax revenues, while offering 3.4 thousand direct jobs and more than 30,000 direct and indirect jobs in the value chain. So having said that, we should also note that during the last few years, the sector has been facing strong challenges and an ever-changing environment, and all these have spelled the end of business as usual era for the liquid fuel sector. First of all, we have the institutional and regulatory changes. The next slide, please. So in 2019, Europe decided to go climate neutral by 2050. We had the Green Deal. And it decided to revise all its legislation for 2030 through the Fit for 55 package. But today, 4 years later, major legislations are still pending, such as the directives for renewables and taxation, which means that once the package is finalized, industry will only have less than 6 to 7 years to respond and achieve the 2030 targets. Together with the legislative changes in consumer choices and investors' requirements, increase uncertainty for our industry. And on top of that, two unexpected and unprecedented crises occurred: the COVID pandemic and then the energy crisis due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. During the pandemic, the sector faced the most severe market collapse in its history. But it managed to handle it and proved its flexibility and resilience by continuing to operate its refineries and securing supply of fuels for critical transport such as food, medical equipment, and personnel, and securing supply of feedstock for the critical supply chain of petrochemical industries. We all remember the need for masks, for medical devices, etc. The energy crisis due to the Russian invasion, on the other hand, had different characteristics, but our sector proved once more its flexibility by responding this time to a feedstock change from Russian crude to crude from other areas of the world without any disruption in the production and supply of fuels and products. So we proved that we can guarantee energy security regarding fuels and energy products, even under extreme and unprecedented circumstances. But I'm afraid that before the energy crisis, energy dependence and security had been taken for granted, and therefore they were underestimated in the EU policymaking. And the same is, I'm afraid, for our sector and the security of our energy products as well. The truth is that turmoil of the energy crisis served as a wake-up call for Europe, I would say, as regards energy dependence and security, energy prices, as well as new dependencies on critical raw materials needed for the ramp-up of green technologies. The EU realized that sustainability cannot be a standalone goal, but instead a trilemma, as they call it now, has to be addressed from now on: the need for secure, affordable, and sustainable energy for all EU citizens. Last but not least, the announcement of the Inflation Reduction Act in the US served as a second wake-up call for Europe regarding the importance of its industry this time. A set of very simple, clear, technology-neutral, and long-term incentives by the IRA create an attractive and investment-secure business environment, promising a fast ramp-up of all new green technologies, under the condition of being deployed in the US. It is so attractive compared to the complex, target-oriented, and I would say punitive EU legislation that IRA puts at risk not only the green investments that Europe wants to attract, but also raises fears of relocation of certain European industrial activities. So coming back to the liquid fuel sector, which had already started its transition before those two unprecedented crises, the question is what the role of this industry could and should be in the future. The European legislation through the sweeping Fit for 55 package has certainly a huge impact in our sector, making clear technological choices: renewables for electricity and electrification for road transport, while banning some other technologies such as internal combustion engines. Low carbon and renewable climate neutral fuels have very limited or even no role in road transport and are only intended for the hard to abate sectors for aviation and maritime. The Recovery and Resilience Facility, the REPowerEU Plan, the Net Zero Industrial Act are the European responses to both crises and to the IRA, aiming at accelerating the green transition and putting focus on technologies such as electrification, renewables, hydrogen, CCS. All of them, no doubt, very important for a fossil-free future, but still, they are not enough. Renewable and low-carbon fuels are of equal importance, especially for the hard-to-abate sectors, but either they are absent or they have been attributed a very limited role to play. Sustainable and synthetic fuels, for example, are included in the European Net Zero Industrial Act, but only for aviation and maritime, no role foreseen in road transport. And even there, they are referred as net zero technologies, but they are not included in the strategic ones that have a stronger financial support. How realistic and how pragmatic is this approach, and how much does it truly contribute to the goals of decarbonization and energy autonomy? Refiners and liquid fuels producers have a clear proposal and a pathway towards decarbonization and energy autonomy. But in order to achieve them, they have to address a twofold challenge. First of all, to keep on supplying secure and affordable energy to all European citizens and the nearby regions in the coming years. And in order to do this, they need to ensure their competitiveness within international competition. Refining assets and infrastructure are strategic assets, integral to energy security as long as traditional fuels will be needed. How long this will be? It will take years, since energy transition won't happen overnight, that's sure. And even in the most ambitious scenario of 1.5 degrees of Celsius, the International Energy Agency predicts that 30 years later, in 2050, the global oil needs will be reduced by 75%, but the world will still need 25 million barrels per day of oil for hard-to-abate sectors and for industry feedstock. We listened just some minutes ago, 100 million barrels per day is the current oil demand. Within the next 30 years, even in the most ambitious scenarios, we will still need 25 million barrels per day of oil. As for road transport in the EU, we have ambitious scenarios for electromobility. Those scenarios foresee 30 million electric vehicles in 2030, which means that the rest of 250 million cars will be internal combustion cars running on liquid fuels. In aviation and maritime as well, ambitious European targets up to 2050 foresee a share of renewables and a share of conventional fuels. So even though refineries will see a demand reduction, they will have to produce large volumes of fuels that will still be needed, even in the most ambitious scenarios, as I said. And therefore, a critical question to policymakers is whether Europe and each member state acknowledges this role. If not, then the next question would be whether they would be willing to see our refineries shutting down or relocating to other areas of the world. And in this case, if they would be willing to import all fuels needed for transport and industry, increasing thus energy dependence. If the answer to those critical questions is no, then refineries should be acknowledged as critical infrastructure for energy security, and not only energy security, because the second challenge that our sector has started to address is its transition. Its transition by reducing its footprint and in order to become carbon neutral. Our industry supports the EU ambition for climate neutrality and has started investing in several new technologies of renewable fuels across Europe, such as advanced biofuels, e-fuels, green hydrogen, CCUS, biorefinery conversions, waste to fuel, and many others. With all those investments that I mentioned, our refineries aim at producing carbon neutral fuels by gradually replacing crude with sustainable feedstocks such as biomass, waste, non-recyclable plastic, green hydrogen and green electricity, recycle or capture CO2, etc. All of them domestic raw materials, very important for our energy security and energy autonomy that the EU needs and aims for. The sector not only has the will to plan and implement, but most important, it has the capacity to deliver. We have the infrastructure, we have the technical and engineering expertise, the investment capacity, and we can deploy mega projects quickly. These strong points of our sector, together with our track record, are the best guarantees for delivering our vision to become reliable suppliers of affordable, sustainable, and domestic energy, addressing thus all three parameters of the energy trilemma: security, affordability, and sustainability. Within this context, what about Hellenic Energy? At Hellenic Energy, we address both challenges as well. Excuse me. First, the challenge to preserve our dominant position as producers, export-oriented in the East Med region, by investing in efficiency, digitalization, and competitiveness of our assets. Our group has also been involved in the exploration business, as you well know, during the last few years, owning the exploration.
And I forgot to mention, Liana, that you're a board member of the Hellenic IQ Upstream Kiparisiakos Gulf.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is one of the upstream projects at Hellenic IQ Energy.
One of the 5 blocks that Hellenic Energy owns exploration rights. So at Hellenic Energy, we own the exploration rights of 5 blocks at the moment, 3 in the Ionian Sea and 2 in the area of Crete. Those last 2 in cooperation with, in joint venture with ExxonMobil. And so far, we have completed the 3D seismic surveys for the 3 Ionian blocks and the 2D surveys for the other 2 blocks in Crete. And we are currently evaluating whether we should proceed with drills. The prospect of oil and gas reserves in the Greek territory, if confirmed, because it has to be confirmed, will not diminish any transition activity, but it will give our country the opportunity to cover the fuel needs in the coming years with domestic energy, supporting thus the national GDP and the great balance, and it will give us the opportunity to invest in green technologies as well. And the second challenge, and that's for the second challenge, as I said, for Hellenic Energy, our second challenge is to rapidly transform ourselves according to our Vision 2025, as we call it, aiming at reducing our carbon footprint by 50% by 2030, with investments of around 4 billion euros, more than half of them for new low-carbon energy projects. Our investments include reduction of our environmental footprint in our core business, in our refineries, diversification of our feedstock by gradually replacing crude with sustainable feedstock, expansion of our portfolio to new kind of green energies and services, such as renewable energies, mainly solar and wind, and new services such as, for example, development of an electromobility fast charging network. Emphasis has been placed on new technologies such as CCS, blue and green hydrogen, green electricity, renewable diesel, the well-known HVO, sustainable aviation fuels, fuels from recycled used cooking oils and other waste materials, e-fuels from green hydrogen and green electricity. So coming to an end, I will conclude by summarizing the key takeaways, I would say, from what I said so far. First of all, legislators and policymakers should let technologies compete based on the CO2 reduction achieved in their life cycle and based on their contribution to energy autonomy on an inclusive and technology neutral basis, as Christine mentioned before. So they should base this transition on an inclusive and technology neutral basis, taking into account all economic and social aspects related to a just transition. Liquid fuels are part of our energy security, there is no doubt, and we will still need them in the coming decades. Refining industry should neither be ignored nor taken for granted. It is the reliable supplier of domestically produced fuels that our economy and society need. The EU and the member states should acknowledge it as critical infrastructure and ensure its viability and competitiveness against shrinkage or relocation. As a sector and as Hellenic Energy, we offer unique and complementary decarbonization solutions for a broad spectrum of energy needs in several sectors, all modes of transport, agriculture, construction, industry. We are part of the solution for achieving not only climate neutrality, but energy autonomy as well, as I explained, supporting a fair and just transition for all European citizens, but this should be acknowledged by legislation and policies. And finally, as a sector, we aspire to become the technology and investment champions in green technologies. We have the track record, we have the capacity, we have the vision and the strategy. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be glad to participate in the discussion and answer your questions.
Thank you, Liana. Thank you for being with us. I got to mention this from Thessaloniki, which is also my hometown. And a friend of mine said, oil is too valuable to burn. And I think we're getting there. And the idea, right now, the world has 1.9 billion air conditioners. In, I think, about 2030 something, or less than 2040, the world is going to have 5 billion air conditioners. I think we're going to discuss later with George when the next heat wave hits us, most likely next week here in Greece, and I don't know when it's going to be in Europe. You will see again the disturbances that in the market. This is a volatile market, and it's not something to be taken for granted that the current today's prices will be the same tomorrow. But I don't want to talk too much. Before we have Harilaos Petrakakos. Thank you for being with us, Harilaos. Harilaos is a good friend for some years now. He's also in the shipping industry, one of the critical industries for Greece. I think people know Greeks around the world, aside from ancient history, for its shipping. That's what it is all about today. He has successfully supported owners, banks, insurance companies, and his expertise in shipbuilding, marine claims, hull, machinery, anything has to do with ships. He's also part of SNAME, which he's going to explain better than I can in a bit, and HELLENiQ, which are global organizations of shipping and environmental protection. And he is also part of the MIT Alumni Club here in Greece. And he's also a resident of New York. You told me last time, I got to say that, but he...
Citizen of the United States.
Citizen of the United States. Yes. And an expert in nuclear power. There is so much discussion. I mean, it's not so much discussion. People have just started the conversation about nuclear power.
No, that's wrong. Sorry, Kostas. I will stop you. 1977.
That's why I invited you.
1977, Professor Hadjopoulos, being the head of the Energy Council here in Greece, he suggested nuclear power, and he was sent away by the late Konstantinos Karamanlis the Senior. I will jump out of this because that's long history, and I've been involved and interested in nuclear power since 1973. It was my dream was immediately sent away stopped by Professor Hadjopoulos because he says the industry is not yet ready. But I never let it. But I will go in a different way now. I will not talk only about nuclear. I will come to nuclear in a way of oil is everywhere. As George said, when we had the shutdown everywhere in the world because of COVID, there was very small amount of oil that was not used. But at that same time, the CO2 went up. The carbon particulate matter, or the particulate matter, PM2.5, which is the pollution, it didn't go down, it went up. All this now are bringing me to say that net zero is a misnomer and a misleading word, net zero. As in my interview that I gave to Mani in February, I specifically informed the reporter that net zero is nothing but an accounting gimmick, and it has nothing to do with CO2 reduction. The CO2 will be produced and the CO2 will be traded, and the people will be paying taxes, and there will be no reduction in the total CO2, and we don't need to. But I will also say, I'll leave you now to think about it, of where this is going. But I must say that everybody jumped on LNG, and LNG has methane, and methane has methane slip, and methane slip is harmful. And if you look at how much methane is escaped in the United States, which produces gas, in Russia, in Norway, in England, and
all around the world, everything,
all around the
any
world
oil-producing country, they have huge amounts
Yes.
of flare-ups.
So the amount of methane is huge. And what is methane? It's carbon, CH4. So that nobody cares about, nobody mentions it, and actually we're pushing for it. So now we need a mix of energy. And need an energy production that includes nuclear power in order to lead to zero. Zero cannot be, and zero is not asked. If you read what everybody's talking about, is that we have to go to net zero in 2050, and we have to compare it to 1850. How can we do these two things? How can anybody think of bringing those two together? So we skip that, and we say, let people think and dream, and have the media and the politicians bombard them that the
Sorry to interrupt you, Harry, but somebody suggested to stop volcanic eruptions, but there is...
No, that has to be done. No, that's okay. This is something that I'm coming to, and it was in my interview as well at the time, that I mentioned, and in many fora, I mentioned even the United Nations, I said, you have that you're telling us that anthropogenic. So what is the total emissions? We cannot count the volcanic eruptions. We cannot count the fires. Yes, because this year, in 2022, do you know what the mix will be between anthropogenic and naturogenic? With 20 to 80. Last year, it was 30 to 70. 30% is the anthropogenic. And we are trying to limit, from my point of view, from my shipping point of view, 2.2% to make it 1.1%. Out of what? Out of the 30%. Okay, which means we're going to cut down 0.3% when we need CO2. We need CO2. We don't need the carbon particulate matter, but we need CO2 in the atmosphere. Anyway, another question that came up from George, basically, and about the lignite from you, is that we shut down the 2 lignite plants that we have. Do we know how many were starting coal plants in India and in China, and how many they have? They have
thousands of them, not hundreds.
Correct.
They're expanding them. They're expanding them.
There are thousands of them, and they are continuously and every day building. And I'm glad that I am very keen on using nuclear power eventually. Maybe next 8 to 10 years, we're going to have a mix of nuclear power. Nuclear power coming out of fission and nuclear power coming out of fusion. Nuclear power out of fission is the one we're having today. And that one is getting to use a new way of producing, which is through molten salt reactor. The molten salt reactor is something that you will be able to understand. It's a canister. It's like let's say big battery that has a drain, that when something happens in that canister, all that material is drained and solidifies, and is isolated, and it's not radioactive anyway, because the food, the igniting element that we use is spent uranium. And that is been that new technology is, well, a little bit younger than me, because it was created in 1956. So it was stopped because it could not produce nuclear bombs, and therefore it was put away. But we having now this power, creating energy that is not going to help anybody use it for nuclear bombs. And that's why they don't use it. Russia and America, now they're starting, and they prefer to have something that produces nuclear bombs. But we don't. And luckily, in the meeting we had in Greece, MIT-sponsored event in 30 and 31st of March, I met a very interesting company with whom I started being in cooperation as a head of the maritime atomic energy. Because that is not fission, it is fusion. Αυτό που λέμε στα ελληνικά σύνδεξης. We have σχάσεις που είναι fission, and σύνδεξης is what is fusion. And fusion is what's happening in the sun. And that is absolutely no radioactivity coming out of there. And about a month ago, the United States nuclear energy put it away. He said, yes, we are not going to regulate fusion because fusion is not radioactive. It will be much easier to get permissions and much easier to go ahead. I'm not at liberty to discuss how, because I'm under NDA, and therefore I cannot say much more except that I'm glad that Democritos and the university are going to join in that foreign company in order to speed up the development of what's going on. And we hope that in 8 years that power generation will come onto ships as well as on let's say floating power plants that will be spread around the world just until people realize that that power is safe. And this is where I will try to get through Mr. Alexopoulos and Liana to get ELPE or Hellenic Energy involved in this development. But that's now besides the point. Therefore, I will entertain any questions you have about nuclear power and nuclear energy, but it's something that we need to have. And I must say also for Hellenic's sake and motor oil, because we are a net exporter of energy goods, we will never get away from fossil fuels. Anyone that says otherwise is a liar, if not a dreamer, simply dreamer, but is a liar and doesn't know what he's talking about. You have to look holistically and you have to see how much the fossil fuels have helped our life and make us what we are today. And by having the fuel mix together with other clean fuels, which will come basically from the nuclear power. And that was my first speech in 2012 in New York in Capitol Hill. When I asked, why can't we have liquid hydrogen being produced from nuclear power? That's the one green one. The rest is from other sources. There's always something that is not green. So I don't want to keep any longer. I would like to entertain. I can show you slides, presentations I've made even to important people in energy and energy decisions in the United States and elsewhere. But I would prefer to stop here and tell you that Greece will become independent as they are because we have good companies. We have Hellenic Energy, we have Motor Oil, and we have so many other people, private people, Mytilineos and Kopelouzos and all the others, and private enterprises that have invested a lot of money, and we're getting there. And once we solve the problem of storage, which the Chinese are helping us to solve, We will be able to get a lot of solar power, a lot of wind power, together with fossil fuels and nuclear power. And we can start using lignite once we take the carbon capture into play. We will be able to do wonders, and we will be able to sell electricity to other countries. Thank you very much for having me.
Harilaos, I will say that you mentioned Capital Link. They are going to honor Bernozzi this week on Wednesday. You know, I've got a table to that event with HABA, the Hellenic, business organization. But
Bankers.
yeah, the
It's
bankers
very much.
association. But I will say, Harilaos, I will say one thing. Okay, we're talking here among logical people. But the politics on nuclear, et cetera, become nuclear to a certain degree in the United States and in Europe, as you know better than I do, quite frankly. Look at what Germany did when they started closing down their nuclear plants. Okay, different plants, I agree, different technologies. But there are the politics that are taking place where logic is no longer the operative word, quite frankly, in the way nations are behaving. Am I wrong on this?
I love that question. I love that question, Kostas. I love that question. I will answer it really.
I know you're going to like each other anyway, but I knew that.
Okay, no, I'll be very brief, very brief. I was asked the same question, by the way, by the journalist. And I said, since people like Bill Gates, like Elon Musk, are involved, and as long as Shell oil companies investing in nuclear power, as long as companies like Hitachi, Toyota, Volkswagen, conglomerates, let's put it this way, are investing in nuclear power, they have the means to convince the media, who will convince the people in the same way that our Mr. Chodras, with his nice, very nice and calm voice, convinced us that COVID would kill us.
And wear masks.
Thank you very much.
It depends on what kind of money transfer we're talking about.
That is, a lot of money will go into it because it's a lot of money to be made.
Well, that's
money
that's
to be made.
Because
I want to say that we design for the group that is want to put nuclear power in ships. We have designed, as PMP Marine Consultants, one Cape-sized vessel, which is 180,000 tons dead weight, can carry 179,000 tons of grain, coal, or grain actually not coal, and iron ore, and a VLCC that can carry 300,000 tons of oil or 2,000 barrels. And that is because oil will always be here. And that's why the ship can run on nuclear power, but the rest of the world can run on fuel because we need the fuel. We need our shirts, our shoes, our cars, anything.
Basic infrastructure.
You're using logic, Harilaos. You're using logic. Kristina, let me ask you.
My glasses.
Kristina, let me ask you a question because I
actually before you ask your question, can I ask something? Can I contribute something to this nuclear conversation that we're having? There's two things that we're not taking. Well, I'm sure you're taking them into consideration, but I would like your point of view on this. So there's two things that are really problematic with the nuclear conversation. Right. So when we're talking about policy changes and about the regulations, right? So are you telling me that Greece will not need the 123 agreement to put a nuclear power plant in Greece? Or if that 123 agreement will be made easier for Greece because of the relationship we have with the United States? Right. So how politics move and how it changes, right? So it's one of those things that, I mean, it will never be possible for X country and it will happen for another country, and that changes on the whims of wind, right? So that's one thing. Another thing that we need to understand is, right, obviously raw materials and the whim of the raw material when it comes to nuclear and how we depend and who do we depend on for those raw materials is something that we don't have to consider when it comes to liquid fuels, because as Ms. Gouta said, like, we have those and there's something that we need to preserve and they're integral to our security as a country, right? And you said about how the Chinese are helping us solve a problem Well, the Chinese are actually putting up barriers right now with their foreign policy in the last 6 months by limiting the export of their technology, especially in storage and PV. So that's something that, right, it was possible maybe today and maybe tomorrow it won't be. And that's something that I, especially in the field that I'm in, I'm constantly thinking about, right? I'm a political scientist. So that's, I always think about how politics change and how that influences the field that we're in. Obviously, from an engineering point of view, it might be very simple, or it might be more simple than I'm looking at it, right? And therefore, those intricacies I might not be considering, but I would like your opinion on it.
Oh, you said something when we discussed privately, Kristina, that in Dubai, which is known for oil, one of the answers for their future power independence was nuclear energy, and Saudi Arabia has already invested.
It is.
It went.
It is. They
both
just
nuclear
opened.
and renewable.
Just open now.
True, an energy mix is very important. However, I'm also talking about the political consequences and the political impacts that it has in order to develop such a controversial, if you will. I mean, I'm very for nuclear energy. I do believe in it. I just would like to understand like the expectation when it comes to the politics of it.
Listen, I always believe in nuclear energy myself. However, in the West, we have a bunch of psychopaths. Okay, they don't comprehend what's going on. And when we talked about earlier about Erdogan, we talked about Turkey, we talk about China, we talk about some of these nations. They have the ability to do things because they don't have the same psychological issues that we have in the West, including in the EU and the United States.
Correct. I will answer you the question now in the form of politicians. Politicians obey the money. And I'm not ashamed of saying it because I've learned through my years of dealing with problems in shipping as well as legislation and regulations in shipping. It's all the money. We won't have ballast water treatment. We won't have oily water separators. We won't have now what we call the scrubbers. And we're going to have nuclear just because if not, as I mentioned, if not on ships immediately, it will be on floating power plants that will be installed. I hope the first one will be installed in Greece, in an island, near an island, in like we have the wind generators being on an island. It will be something similar to this one. The Chinese already used one on a molten salt reactor using pebbles, and they have logistical issues between the two governments' politics now, because one government body says, I don't want any nuclear-powered ships in my waters. It doesn't matter whether it is Chinese or it is American, because that legislation came because of the American submarines and American aircraft carriers. They are powered by nuclear power.
For over 60 years now.
Absolutely.
It's not new. Okay, it's not new. The thing is that the legislation, the regulations for safety are in place. Now, as you very well said, we have to convince the politicians, and the politicians playing games. If it was not for the politicians, the scientists would have found a solution for what you want to call it, climate change, greenhouse effect, or whatever it is. They would have found the solution, but they cannot because the politicians do not know where they're going. They know nothing.
But the politicians are part of another game. Okay, there's another game going on. As we know, we don't have to discuss the game. There's a lot of games taking place, and logic again is not the final thing. Kristina, let me just ask you this one question, because I was with the Consul General of Cyprus the other day in New York, and we were just chatting because we were also with the Consul General of Greece. And one thing he had mentioned is that Cyprus is really thinking of expanding on solar energy, in particular with transmission lines that he was talking about going from Cyprus to, I don't know, I think he said Crete, and then into Greece, and then into Europe. Can you explain what's going on right now in that scenario?
Yeah, so it's called the Eurasia Interconnector. right? It's a project that's in conversation right now in Cyprus, and it's a conversation between Greece and Cyprus. The funding is still under gathering step. They're still gathering the funding. So therefore, it is still a very big question mark in my mind. The government is very for it. So we have a new government in Cyprus since February. So it's a pretty new government, as you all know. And the government is very much for it, but the funding is still, they have about 50% of the funding gathered, and they're looking for the rest of the funding. Now, if everything goes well, this should be a very big step for Cyprus because it will finally connect us to the rest of Europe and really showcase the potential that we have in terms of solar and the energy production and how we contribute to the market. So the energy generation in Cyprus right now is above the demand that we have, right? Obviously, as I said in my presentation, we have losses and those will be countered by storage solutions. But the energy generation, if we double the solar production of Cyprus right now, we can really contribute to some serious to a good market share for Southern Europe and hopefully to Northern Europe at some point. So so that connector is supposed to go from Limassol, which is in the southern part of Cyprus, to go to Crete, and then from Crete into central Greece, and then into the rest of the markets, Greece, right? And that is part of a greater connector that's supposed to connect us also to Africa, to Northern Africa. There's a second part to that connectivity,
Ariadne,
so it's not just
called.
no, it's called the Eurafrica interconnector. So it's supposed to connect Northern Africa. The Ariadne connector is something different, but it's not for electricity production, in as far as I know.
He had mentioned, Kristina, he had also mentioned Israel. There's some linkage with Israel.
Yes,
what is that about?
So that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying, Northern Africa, right? And so we're the connector, the Eurasia is just between Cyprus and Greece, and the Eurafrica connector would be between Cyprus, Egypt, and Israel. But that one is kind of on the back burner right now. The Eurasia one that connects us to Greece is the one that's more prominent, at least in the political and conversation cycles that are happening right now, which is really interesting because it really will pivot the conversation, and it will really showcase the potential that Southern Europe has. However, as I was mentioning to Konstantino in our private conversation, we have a problem with all of the infrastructure for all of these is dependent on nations outside of Europe mostly, right? So in the solar industries, we are 85% dependent on solar capacity coming in from China. And right now, China is really limiting its export of solar panels, and at least of the technology of the solar panels. And therefore, we are being handicapped, or our production, or even when we build the facilities, it takes a lot longer, and therefore it handicaps the capacity. So what I was talking about is that something in order to pivot us is to onshore some of that infrastructure and have a bigger conversation with stakeholders, right? So, right, I have two hats. I am an academic, and I'm also a political scientist that works in the industry. As an academic and as someone who works in the industry, I believe that there should be a much stronger conversation between academia and innovations that are happening, and not instead of paying the Chinese or paying some other nation, and right now it is the Chinese, then pay some other nation, we onshore, we bring all that potential back to Europe. And Southern Europe really has the education, right? We have one of the most educated populace in the world, right? Southern Europe has educated potential. And we do have that capability to bring more jobs and therefore better energy security to our nations.
Liana, let me ask you a question geopolitically, from your perspective, in terms of the regulations that you were talking about. Can you go into some of the political issues around your industry, Liana? You're muted.
I'm sorry, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, I have to say that all legislation that has been taking place during the last few years in Europe is mostly politically driven. And this gets worse and worse every day, I would say. And especially during the last institutional term since 2019. I would say that all legislative decisions and all policies regarding energy and climate are politically driven and not scientific, not science-based. They are not based on science evidence. And we see that even the impact assessments that the Commission does when it announces a proposal or a new legislation, they are getting lower and lower every time. So the legislative procedure is not only politically driven, but it's dominated by the NGOs, I would say, who support certain technologies. And I need that, and I believe that EU legislators should go back to their to the science and to the evidence-based decisions. Otherwise, we will see many problems in the future. And as we already mentioned some of the problems, as Christine said about the raw materials for new technologies for solar panels and so on. This is a discussion that came up lately regarding the critical raw materials for all those new green technologies. And it is surprising to see that Europe hasn't thought of those kind of problems before, because they are not focusing on the assessment of the technologies they promote and they legislate for on a life cycle analysis. They do not take into account parameters such as energy dependence, for example. And suddenly, after the energy crisis, as I said, those parameters of energy security and energy dependence, dependence on critical raw materials for all those green technologies came up on the table. And now we have to face new kind of problems regarding the deployment of green technologies. So I believe that all these policy making should take into account a life cycle analysis of all those technologies, and should, as I said before, adopt an inclusive approach, giving the opportunity to all technologies to contribute to the climate neutrality goal. We should not exclude any technologies. Our enemy is the CO2 emissions. It's not any specific technology. So any technology that can help us in this goal should be given room and space to develop.
Our enemy is ourselves. Does the Hellenic
our enemy is always ourselves, but we never admit it.
Does the Hellenic Republic have the appropriate voice within the EU or not? Who's controlling the scenario?
We have elections in a week, Lou, here, so it's
it's very complicated.
I have to go to Thessaloniki to vote.
It's very complicated. All member states have a voice, and
that's what they say. That's what they say. But who knows who has the bigger voice? George, what do you think about this? Who has the bigger voice within the EU? What's going on?
I think it's better when we say, Luis, it's better to avoid, say, the Greek or Hellenic Republic.
I like the Hellenic Republic. I'm the
when we're talking about oil or natural gas, because it has nothing to do with Greek Republic. It has to do
we're talking about the politics now. We're talking about the politics.
Okay. And I agree with you that, of course, natural gas and oil, they are not commodities. They are pure geopolitics. That's the only truth. They are not stocks. So as a forecaster, so for answer to who builds, how you say that, who builds equations or make strategies for hedging. So I see some things that they're not mathematics. For example, Patrick Liana, of Total Energies have left the building. Isn't that right, Liana? Patrick left us. But why? Because we are
Sorry,
about
what did you
country
say that Patrick Pouillonnet did? Sorry, I missed that.
has
He
left the
the-
building.
This is an inside joke, but
Yeah.
okay.
So I can understand Patrick, because he had 27 billions to invest, and from that only 9 billions he can invest in hydrocarbons. So the time he left, before he leaves, he had two deals. One at the Ratawi field at Iraq, and I think we all know that. And the second is the LNG, new enormous field at Mozambique, Africa, in two fields that everybody knows, and another three that a few know. So he took his money and he preferred to go somewhere else. I can understand that too, but it's not the point. It's not that point, because we have upstream, midstream, and downstream. And I want to make some points in this, in the nuclear. So you have to excuse me for 3 minutes. I just asked for 3 minutes. Greece, if we say that where the Hellenic Republic have a remarkable presence via Hellenic Energy, the other company, of course, at downstream, where 15 worldwide in the capacity and the ability of refining, were bigger in the refining capacity than countries like Canada, that is the 5th, 6th producer of oil, like the United Kingdom, like those large countries that they are producers. We can refine more. So we have a worldwide presence, remarkable worldwide presence at the downstream. What to say about the midstream? We're the first. And second, the Japanese is very, very, very far from us, especially at very large tankers in the midstream, where we are not. We are not at upstream. So that's everybody is asking 50 years now. Why we're not really? That's the question. And the answer is because I don't think that we can find in geopolitics many countries that they would like to see Greece, the Hellenic Republic, is being triple power. Not both in midstream, in upstream, but in downstream, but in upstream. That, believe me, in the foreign companies that I met people and discussed, it's not very comfortable for a CEO or a CFO or an operational manager of a very large company to see a country that is first to the three levels of oil industry. And apart from that, let's take a look at the new problems, the real problems, because I was very glad to hear what Harilaos said about nuclear. Harilaos, I think I have made a public proposal for a nuclear plant to one of the 4 territories in Greece that they have never been hit by an earthquake, even a 2 Richter magnitude. Not even. We have 4 territories, no moose, as we say, to be exact, here in Macedonia, that they never hit by an earthquake. The difference in Akuyu is in an earthquake plate and is beside another earthquake plate that gave catastrophic.
George, your 3 minutes.
Look,
George, your 3 minutes is up.
let me finish just one minute.
Yeah, well, I was not talking about land-based. I was talking about sea-based. Therefore, the nuclear power will be at sea. It will not be on an earthquake prone land. So that suggestion.
I'm trying to say something else. I'm not opposite for having a nuclear plant, And if it had to do with politics, so it was my proposal to make a nuclear plant outside Greece in Bulgaria, together with Bulgaria, with Bulgaria. That's my proposal.
I think
3 years
already
before.
though, and
But
correct me if I'm wrong, George, Westinghouse is building a new
Yeah,
power plant, nuclear power plant in Bulgaria. And
In Belém.
Bulgaria has
Belém.
its uranium mines in the same area, Drama area, which I don't think, you don't actually put the line.
But actually, I
mining.
want to say something else. I want to say something more important, because my personal view is after 5-6 years, the kind of energy we're going to use is that kind of energy China is using by investing 440 billion in 125 new nuclear plants. That's where we're headed, that's for sure. But the main problems and the next war will not be about nuclear or energy, it will be about water. So we have to be very careful when we're talking about plants in general, nuclear plants or a natural gas plant, because we forgot the main detail that makes the difference. All that plants need to cool their machines, and they're cooling their machines with water. So if we see the paradigm of France, that is have the most nuclear plants all over the world, have 54 nuclear plants that they are working, but the last summer, due to some problems, he stopped the half of them. And he is not revived from this situation because they forgot something very good, that when we, the markets, make plans, the God is laughing because we didn't have water last year. It didn't rain.
Big
So,
trouble.
George,
for example,
George, I will correct you. George, please, George. I'm sorry. And
but I didn't finish. You have
no.
you
I
have
don't. No. I cannot let you finish something that is wrong. When I have nuclear power, I produce water.
what?
I do desalination and I don't need water. The new technologies don't need water. The old technologies that are not used anymore. Romania is building through NuScale, which is not the water usage. The water ones are gone. Why are they gone? Because they're radioactive and people don't want them. People are scared of them. And that is a new technology that will be available. It is available. It will be developed, commercially available in 6 to 8 years, maybe 10 years. The fusion that will be producing water from the sea, because they would be based at sea, most of them. And this is something that you have misunderstood from nuclear power. Nuclear power is in your head, and I thought that by describing that we're going away from the old style, that you would change your mind and you would not go back.
If you be so kind to let me finish, I would say all this. Okay. But you are in a hurry.
Because it's gone.
I will say all that.
Water
I know the difference between the old technology and the new technology. And I know exactly, for example, why EDF taking the privatized part, 15%, to the public sector.
That was the old type.
Anyway, I'm saying that the cooling system of such plants is very, very, very significant. And it's one thing that we have to take care. And the second thing for this time that afraids me, that I wanted to tell you, it is not afraid of me, an investment in nuclear plant or in another kind of energy. That make me afraid as an economist is the interest rate. That makes me afraid. Because if something goes bad to the timeline and the interest rate goes up, so the investment will blow up, as it happened to the United States, to other countries to such kind of big investments. That's what I wanted to say, not technical details, but I'm not a mechanic of nuclear plants.
I would like actually to say, go back to what Liana said earlier, the trilemma of security, affordability, and sustainability. And I will add to that, have enough clean air and water for the rest of us, because you mentioned, and I do agree with you, Yorgos, that, water is a big thing. And I'd like to have, wrapping up your thoughts, because we need to be able to press the button and the lights will come up. We need to be able to pay our bills every month. And I think we all have families and we do face these things every day. And we want clean air and clean water, obviously, for us and our children. In Greece, especially, since we talk about Greece and Hellenic energy independence, and we did touch upon all of these things. It takes, I think I read in Bloomberg, close to 20 billion to rebuild our grid in order to accept some of these new technologies. There is another thing that it actually goes more to Harilaos. They say we're going to put a 20% carbon tax on shipping. That it will eventually make a lot of our goods, since 90% of goods globally are being transported by sea. How are we all going to do, and I want your thoughts of that, and security, affordability, and sustainability, and being clean will work out in Greece in the next 10 years. Because, energy is a long place. It's not something that's going to happen 1 or 2 or 3 years. Politics also being into the mix, since politics is the guiding force.
Are you addressing me or?
Unless Harilaos, you can start.
I would say that basically, if we take shipping, for example, yes, there is the carbon tax. The carbon tax is not only for shipping, it's for all the industries. The only thing is that the industry can easily count how much CO2 or how much carbon you have produced. In shipping, it was all wild because nobody knew who would in the end pay. Now we're having the legislation being itemized, and it would be that whoever pollutes pays. But that means that it will create a fund to help the development and the research of new, let's say, fuels. Including now, luckily, they included nuclear power into that, let's say, funding that will take place. The water, abundance of water can be found and relax all the people only from looking at Dubai, UAE, that has a desalination plant that actually uses only about less than 40% of the water produced. The rest, I don't know where it goes. And it happened to be yours truly in a panel about shipping and water in 2000 in Quebec. And the same questions actually were thrown to the panelists from the environmentalists. Our water, we're going to have a war about water in 5 years. That was 2000. Now we're 2024. Therefore, I do not see lack of water and security of water, especially in Greece, because we have a lot of water around us. And it's very easy to put a small desalination plant, for example, for every village around the sea, around Greece, around Peloponnese, and around the islands. I'm very, very strong believer that Greece is in a very good position for having water forever. Okay. Now, electricity, it's not my baby, except that if we produce it with nuclear power, solar power, wind, provided we have, as I said before, the storage, then we have not intermittent. If we have intermittent, then we need nuclear, which will take up what we're not able to use when there is cloudy when there is no wind, because let us not forget, and George mentioned it, that the utilization factors are very low for both solar and wind. By
And the
nuclear,
grid is not ready for it in Greece anyway, for
of
a
course,
lot of the renewables.
that's easy to produce. For example, I know for a fact that the cable between Crete and Salamis was already ELEVSIS was already installed. It started installing 3 years ago, and it's already completed 2.5 years ago. It's already completed. So it would be very easy to put a cable, provided the money is there, between Cyprus and Crete. And that is the big role that Europe has now, because they want the grid to be one and every country to be self-sufficient. Now, how they will be producing the energy, it doesn't really matter. And I'm a firm believer that in our lifetime and my grandchildren's lifetime, very newborn one of them, will not see the earth being destroyed. We will see the weather change as we're seeing now. But I must tell you also that in 1979, NASA had made a prediction that 2017, Southern Europe, and specifically Greece, it was mentioned precisely Greece and the Greek islands will experience tropical climate, which we have now. But that is besides the point, because they know. And if we had followed what NASA has said, we would not stop the sulfur being thrown into the air, because sulfur helps. And as they say as well, CO2 helps. And let us go back to how the earth was created, how life came into being. And we need CO2, but we don't allow the oceans to absorb the CO2. That's a problem.
Pollution in the oceans, you started with that, is a great concern, and this is something we have actually going to touch upon in another. It's a whole huge different subject on its own merit.
Microplastic.
We discussed, I said, I like this trilemma, and I'll make it a quadrilemma. And
yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong with the word there. You know, you're very good with these things. And I want to ask, let's start with Liana. Greece in the next 10 years, secure, affordable, sustainable, and clean. Can we have it all? We don't want a part of it. We want to have it all.
Well, that's the ultimate goal for Europe and for our country. And we should not neglect any of these dimensions, because so far we have been discussing about sustainability and affordability. And after the energy crisis, as I said, we discovered the energy security dimension. I think we should take a look at all parameters when we design our policies and when we take decisions. We have to secure not only our transition to sustainability and to sustainable energy, but we also have to secure our fair transition, as I mentioned, because we have to be fair for all European citizens. If we talk about Greece, to all Greek citizens across Greece, even in the island regions, even in Evros, and even in Athens, in Thessaloniki. This is a very complicated puzzle, I would say. It's not easy, but Europe should try more on that, because we found out during those two energy crises that there have been some gaps that we have to fill in. And we also have a good benchmark after the announcement of the IRA, a good benchmark of technology neutrality and technology openness, and a way of approaching all those difficult problems and difficult puzzles in a clear and a very simple way. So we have to take our lessons learned from our competitors, and examine all dimensions of the energy problem, whether it is a trilemma or a how do you say the word? Quadrilemma or whatever it is, perhaps even more.
Oh, definitely it's more. And I think, maybe we should follow some of our neighbors' actions, Cyprus being one, Israel and Egypt, and we finally start drilling, because a lot of people, they compare Crete to Zor, and I had this conversation with George, but I don't want to expand too much on this. And this being also in a meta-vasis stage, this conversation for quite a bit, quite a long time. And if any time is right, which I believe the right time is always now. So, but go to Kristina now, because this is something that as a political scientist and an energy expert, you can see Greece from the outside. Being Greek or Cypriot, I don't want
I'm
to.
Cypriot.
Yes, you can see Greece and also Cyprus from the outside, which is also important. Because people inside the country see themselves in a much different way than people of the diaspora, as Lou would have done many programs on this with EMBCA. So looking Greece from the outside and Cyprus from the outside, and facing this trilemma or quadrilemma, wherever, you can add your own questions there. In a few words, what do you see? What some of the ideas you can present to our audience?
So, right. So I'm also an expat, right? I haven't lived in Cyprus in the last 20 years, and I just moved recently here, and therefore I've been seeing the country from the inside for the first time in a very long time, right? Obviously, I visit my family, lives here, but I've been seeing it. I have the privilege of seeing it from the outside and from the inside. And as much as we love to also say that Cyprus and Greece are the same, we're not. And we are very, very, very similar, but we're also very, very different. We are very similar in our capabilities, in our trajectory, in the in the energy transition. But we also have a lot of differences there, and a lot of really key differences. But I won't go into that right now, since it's ending conversation, right? So one of the things, yeah, I know, I will be very frugal with my words. So we need to understand that we have certain natural strengths within our countries, and renewable sources of energy. Like, we shouldn't be harnessing wind or biomass versus PV, for example, because we do have the sun and it is highly abundant here, and therefore we should be harnessing what is our strengths. However, no matter what energy mix we decide to go with, obviously both traditional and non-traditional sources of energy, what we do need to understand is that we're not going to go anywhere until we've harnessed the power of storage. I do believe that storage is very, very important in order to be able to have a sustained future, because affordability, that aspect of the trilemma, is most important. And that is something that our energy security really depends on. And therefore, in order to bring down the costs, we really have to harness and really understand the power of storage. And it has to be done within an open market, a competitive market model. It shouldn't be done by the governments, because then again, monopoly is a problem. The other thing that we need to understand, and I will disagree with Mr. Petrakakos here, is that our infrastructure I don't think is necessarily strong enough to see this energy transition. Yes, we might be able to pivot, but our infrastructure needs to be upgraded with a lot of funding. And that funding cannot come only from within the countries. That funding is very limited within the countries, and we cannot rely on the consumers to pay the cost of that infrastructure, as we have been doing so far. We have to be stronger politically to negotiate for ourselves an earmark in the EU, right? For example, the European Development Fund, to give us a bigger percentage in Southern Europe in order to upgrade that infrastructure, because our grid is very, very weak, both in Greece and in Cyprus, if I might say. It's weaker in different points, but it's definitely very weak. And lastly, one of the things that we need to do is strengthen the business-government relations between the businesses and the governments, because unfortunately, and we do tend to joke about it, but unfortunately, we need a very good cooperation between business and government. And that's something that is not just them, but also all stakeholders in this energy transition. From the consumer, we can't just say to the consumer, this is the new plan. We have to take their input and make sure to have very constructive relationships with the government. And the businesses will benefit from this stronger relationship with the government, right? We need to understand that we are allies in this and not competitors in this. And that's something I always encourage. So that's it for me. Sorry for being too long.
One thing is for sure, we cannot raise the debt ceiling here in Europe. And although the answer to many of the questions was more subsidies.
We'll print money. We'll print money.
Obviously, inflation is better.
We print and burn money.
That's where I want to go to George to close this great panel. Thank you, all of you. The answer is not raising the debt ceiling. And in Europe, I think it's much more complicated than it is in the US Congress. Not that it's simple over there, but in Europe, it's almost impossible.
Look, if we're closing, we have to separate two things. One thing is the prices of oil, of natural gas, and all that. And the other thing is the retail price, electricity, for example. You know, I'm not sure if there are more than 100 people here in Greece that they know how we calculate the price of the electricity. And I will tell you my experience some months before. I'm making a business plan for an energy company here in Macedonia, and a part of it was to understand how we calculated this thing. So after 30 years of fulfilling and building equation, it took me 5 days to understand the law with the equation that calculates the kilowatt hours. How the company that produces power, electricity, will get paid. And there is madness in this. It's completely and totally madness. We have to make it more easy and more safety, secure, and crystal to the people. Half of the mathematicians, they cannot understand that type. Not to make it wrong. They cannot understand it. It's very bad and ugly. That's one thing. The second, and I think that Kristina, as a scientist, and if I thought right, is in Cyprus, Kristina, if I'm right. So things are changing, most of all by persons. And there are some persons of interest. For example, when in Cyprus began all the story, that everybody was happy. A great part of that story, apart from the political, their geopolitical and all that, it was because we are lucky of noble energy. That company in the pandemic was in chapter 11, bankrupt and bought by 7. So the time of Charles Davidson, who was the president of the Central Israeli Council of the United States of America, were very lucky because he understood and make some things. And I'm sure that if that person wasn't in that position in noble energy, we will never talk here about those things in Cyprus. That's 2008, 2009. But things are changing. So we have to follow the change and interpret the change. And one change is 7. Does anybody see who are the main investors in that giant company? The main individual investors? Because I see them. And one of them is Mr. Robert Denham. And Mr. Robert Denham of the famous Oak Tree Capital Group is the owner of New York Times. And New York Times is the largest newspaper and have a certain position about what happened in the Mediterranean Sea. And after him, the main person of interest in Chevron and the third biggest individual investor of that large company and respected company is a 73, 74-year-old man from Canada. And his name is Sugar, Ronald Sugar, if I'm right. Yes, his name is Ronald Sugar. And Ronald Sugar became a friend of Recep Tayyip Erdogan because before he invested to Chevron and be such a big investor in Chevron, he was the CEO of Northrop Grumman. And Northrop Grumman is the company that produces with Lockheed Martin the F-35.
And many others.
That person of interest is, and his job make him more close to Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And now he's in Chevron. So I'm not saying, or I'm not putting blames or charges to anybody. I'm just reminding that in the markets, there are key people that they're making decisions. And that is the people that they are making decisions. Not the states, not the European Union as a mechanism or as a political union, but those persons is who decide. And I think in Greece, we're a little very far to interpret them and see what their opinions of those kind.
Interesting.
I think Lou has spoken to many of.
Listen, those
people,
those interests have always existed. By the way, there's always interests, and they do influence the politics. Listen, this has been Konstantine. This has been a fascinating discussion.
And I want to add, let's look for our own interest. That's a whole new conversation we should have actually here in Greece. What is our interest? Because there is a lot of, we're thinking about what other people say. Okay, other people say whatever they say. What do we want? So you go now.
Listen, Konstantine, in terms of our interests, unfortunately, our interests, I'm talking about Hellenic now and Hellenic Republic. I don't like the word Greece, as you know. The Hellenic Republic interests and the Cyprus Republic interests, unfortunately, are also influenced by other interests. And I say unfortunately, but we have to get back, I agree with you, with our interests. Konstantine, to the panelists, this was a fascinating discussion. We're obviously going to continue it. Thank you so much. This was great. I know it's late in Europe. Late in Europe, not so late over here. To the audience, thank you for being with us today. Next week, join us for another interesting EMBCA panel discussion. This one is going off on a different tact, and it has to do with In Search of James Williams, and from African-American slave to Hellenic hero. So that should be very interesting because lately James Williams obviously has gotten a lot of interest in Greece and on the internet and a lot of what's taking place. We have to go through those things because a lot of nonsense is coming out. So EMBCA is going to bring back the sanity in a discussion of James Williams. Thank you to the panel. Thank you, Kristina. Thank you, Harilaos. Thank you, George. Thank you, Liana. It was a fantastic discussion. You guys are the best. I love you. Take care. Happy Father's Day to the fathers. And Harilaos, since you're a grandfather, happy grandfather to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Take care. Yes,
take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.